So today we're excited to have Dagny Scott and Leslie Freeman, co-founders of the brand and strategy and social impact consultancy right across the street here, Fearless Unlimited. You guys are officially the closest guests we've ever had. So if there's boxes to be checked, we're moving through those right now. And Fearless, just if you guys don't know much about them, is a agency dedicated and committed to helping brands unleash their potential so they can move the world forward. So today's discussion is really intended to kind of be an insightful discussion into the work and reason that these guys put into the brands they help and the people that are within those brands and the people that those brands affect in today's age of change. So, and I think the really key thing that we're going to kind of touch on today is it's we all want to say we know ourselves, but in today's age of change, it's very important for brands to know their truths, and we're going to try and figure out a little bit about that today. And so, in the brand work I do with my own clients, I often refer to brand as a promise, and because I think everyone assigns. You expect things out of a brand, and so that's an easy way for me to kind of wrap up and say, what is this brand going to offer me? What's their promise to me? And so as we got closer to this, it really got interesting, and hearing you guys use this word truth. And I loved that as a starting point. Is the truth the thing you need to know before you can build a promise? So maybe we just start there and dive in, and I'm going to let you guys take it away, but that's kind of where I wanted to take us off from.
Excellent. Well, yes, that's very true, and we're going to talk about finding your truth and making it matter. So thanks all of you for coming, first of all. There's a lot of folks. And you're celebrating our 3rd year anniversary, by the way, with us today.
On today?
Fearless turns 3. Yeah.
Big cake.
So
yes.
A shout out to our amazing team, and a shout out to my amazing business partner, brilliant, inspired people who are doing great work every day. We really try to do this with our clients, but with our team as well, really think about the highest and best use of the talents that are there. So really excited to celebrate our 3rd year anniversary with you all and share a little bit about what we do. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what we do, who we work with, and then we're going to take you through how we get to this truth idea and how it can really help brands. So let's just dive right in.
Cool. So why we exist.
I can help it. Thank you. Ready to go one more?
No.
No, okay.
No,
Leaving.
This is why we exist.
Okay, good. It is why you exist.
It's going to skip right over.
It's a very critical part, Jay.
It took us 3 years to get to this, to understand why we exist. But we do start here because this idea of knowing your truth, I mean, it's interesting. You just alluded to this. Like a couple of interesting things about this. The first is, and I think Leslie just alluded to this, like, yeah, we exist to help brands, and to us, the crux, and it all starts with this idea of truth. It doesn't matter where a client of ours is starting. They could be a huge 100-year-old brand with thousands of employees. It could be a startup that hasn't even manifested themselves yet. They come at some level of believing they know who they are, and yet then there's always an insight or epiphany when really digging into the core that helps them get to what I would call, what we often call sort of a higher order truth, right? A profound truth, an enduring truth. And a big part of the theme that you're going to see here today is this idea of, in an age of change, what remains the same about this truth, and then what evolves, and how to manage that sort of yin-yang. The other thing that is fun about this is a lot of the way we think of this is in fact a fractal. I mean, technically we work on brands and organizations, and that's who's paying us. But we often joke that it ends up being like brand therapy, and it ends up being like human therapy too, because really, what is a brand or an organization but the individuals who are building it every day? And we think sometimes I think we can confuse ourselves by thinking we're working for this immutable thing, but we're all building our organizations every day. And so a lot of what we're talking about works at the individual and human level as well. There's a lot of words on this, and we're not going to go through it all. But I think the important thing is this, like when we talk about what we do, and this is more philosophy than process these things, and the salient piece is this idea of finding your truth is really a deep exploration about the parts of the brand or the individual that are enduring and unchanging, but the make it matter part is the part that actually has to evolve, because you get these big tectonic forces. Things are moving and changing faster in our world today than ever before. And so in order to lead or transform culture, in order to play offense, in order to not be reactionary, it's really that beautiful alchemy of both, of knowing your deep foundational, the part of your story that is enduring. And by the way, it's funny because we often talk about a brand as a story, and a promise is a part of the story, but then what's the part that has to be updated and constantly evolving, that actually has to be a little more fluid, right? So the your truth is the enduring part, the making it matter is the part that's always looking out and understanding how you're intersecting with that world, and if you get that right, you can be
Is making it matter the kind of becoming that, in the old ad days, somebody would look at something and go, why do I care? Is making it matter, is it replacing it as people are more conscious and wanting brands to make a difference in their lives?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. I think that there's something about meeting the need of the time and being the need of the time. And so understanding that you have these capabilities and these assets, but the time may require those to be applied in a completely new and different way.
Right.
And by the way, we'll talk about this, and maybe we're talking about all of it now anyway.
This is all a disruptive thing, don't worry. This is how it usually goes.
It's interesting because if you think about it, we live in this time where we have unprecedented corporate power, right? Think about the role and the power and the responsibility of companies that we interact with today. Look what's happening to Facebook. Look what's happening with social media. What have we wrought? How much power do companies have? When we think about Airbnb or we think about Uber, they're replacing systems and social structures. So to a certain degree, meeting the need of the time is actually bigger than profit. And we're going to talk about all this, but it's really about, what is the need of the time and how do we show up in a way that takes into account how we can be our biggest and our best. And by the way, if you block and if you ignore some of those tectonic shifts that Dagny was just talking about, it actually might come back to bite you. Look what's happening right now with some of these companies and their reputations, and there's these looming questions about what have they built, and is it the best structure, and do we need to intervene? And by the way, you're probably experiencing this now every day, even when you go on Facebook. The experience is literally different than it was 2 weeks ago because they've had to change it. So I know that my experience used to be littered with different kinds of media and advertising, and now it's very different almost overnight. So so this make it matter is about how you show up, and because of the era that we live in, all of it gets jumbled. Like, what is brand? What is your ethic, duty, and responsibility? What is your purpose? And to Dagny's point a minute ago, we also think about what does it feel like to work at these places and to show up and be part of building what and to what end? So all of these questions are becoming really essential and at the fore of what is this question about my brand truth. It becomes a much more expansive set of criteria that you use, rather than this narrow, the brand, and we're about something small. It's definitely.
And you haven't even like touched on also politics, and the expectation, and now the decision, whether or not you weighed in, and then it's not even your decision because somebody else is making that decision for you, and suddenly you find yourself in this maelstrom, and how to navigate all of that is just
and that's so interesting
different.
What you do, and if you're not familiar with their client background, that there is organizations involved and there is a political thing, and it's funny that in the example that you gave with the Facebook idea, we are seeing brands become the scale that former governments were, and how do they feel it's their responsibility now to approach you and go, man, we need to have somebody help us stay in check and not run amok, because people are going to hold us to the fire at some point. Is that kind of like how some of the engagement starts with you guys?
We can't share a lot. We had a very interesting conversation with Facebook. I mean, let's just say they are asking themselves like all of this. Right. Obviously, it's like, what is our responsibility at this point is amazing. The engagement started at any given. I mean, sometimes the world is changing around them, or sometimes they are recognizing that the change in leadership means that they have to. I mean, that it can start at any point. It is interesting that the thing that you don't see on here is we actually have done a little bit of not a little bit, but more and more political work, not in terms of political campaigns, but just in terms of platforms and theories and whatnot. And it's amazing how these worlds are drawing closer and closer together.
Well, and I had an
Having to think of
interesting
these things.
thing here in Boulder, because I know that, the current way that politics runs, it's the way politics runs. It's a little bit slower. It's got a lot of decision. And if you look at the way a startup runs, it's like, let's make that decision. And I actually saw a band of startups get together because the city wasn't doing what businesses needed to do. And it was at that moment I realized, like,
Policy's really close. Yeah.
yeah, you could
Right.
you could exchange brands for, hey, these are the new decision makers in,
Right.
in organizations, because they just
Yeah.
operate in a different way.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting, and these are some of the clients that we've worked on over the course of our career, and some folks in the room have worked on some of these brands with
Yeah.
us. So it was amazing working with you on some of this stuff. It's interesting. So the column that starts with Microsoft, those are some of the brands that we kind of got our brand boot camp training on. In the middle, Dagny and I actually worked in Washington D.C. We were based here, but we worked in D.C. on for a strategic communications firm, and a lot of times we worked with brands and companies who were in a reputational moment of crisis. So Livestrong when Lance stepped down, NPR when their CEO and their editorial board, was picked apart by the media, and they were being painted a certain way as liberal when they're publicly funded and should be fair and balanced,
Right.
et cetera. So these moments of crisis, and really learn that marketing is one portion, and by the way, the CMO gets a lot of cred because they have these big media budgets, but actually when the shit hits the fan, they're not the decision maker. It's the CEO, it's the general counsel, it's, who are they lobbying for, what are the decisions that are getting made. And so when we think about some of these other companies that we are working with now, like, so for example, you see Twitter's logo at the top there are these looming questions about how might they be able to tell their story in the context of all the stuff that's happening with Facebook and bots and fake news and the public agora. And so in a way, all of those questions we think are now coming to bear on brand. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that leads us to believe. And I'd love to just kind of jump into some of this stuff. So this we've kind of set this up really nicely, which is we fundamentally believe that this notion of brand and sort of brand is one thing that you do over here, and and it's this beautiful polished thing, and then the business is this thing that you run that's over here. It's completely an old idea, right? Like, it just doesn't work that way anymore. Brand, and we can there's new rules that we really think about. So we'll just jump into these. So it used to be that brand, and a lot of us in the room are people who are polishers of said brands, right? Like, we have our little
Polishers of something more often than not.
Yeah. Right. That was very visceral. Like,
Yeah,
Depending
it's
on
all
the
right.
day, yeah.
So, and sound effects. So I think that this idea that brand was owned by the brand people. We had brand clients. It was literally the logo and the letterhead. It was the brand. A lot of our clients and a lot of the stuff that maybe people in the room have worked on are brand campaigns, and brand campaigns were designed to hide all manner of sins. Like, you do your brand, and then you do all your shitty acquisition and sales and like all the other like ugly stuff over here. And that's just a dead concept, right? And we just talked about a couple of brands. We talked about Airbnb literally needing to have a diversity policy when you sign on to become a host. We talk about Uber, like completely everybody, look what's happening with Lyft. It's like, Uber's brand just got eviscerated, but it was all because of these internal actions, right? And if you think about Delta, they're in the mix on this whole gun control issue now, and they were just trying to figure out, like, how do we navigate, and they tried to find a middle ground on an issue that there just isn't middle ground on right now. And so and by the way, the Me Too movement, all of this stuff, everything is your brand. And so you may think that you have a gorgeous logo and you have a beautiful internal articulation of what your vision is, and then boom, how you behave, how your leadership behaves, how your team behaves, the unintended consequences of your policy, of your actions, it all is your brand. So what we see today is that there has to be a more expansive view that is very different than what's the video and what's the line and what color. It's a different world order, because all of that stuff gets pushed to the wayside when the real world happens. And
a word that we use now is because there's been so much talk in past years when transparency was a thing, and that felt really new, and this and that, and you have to be transparent in this world. And we
Now somebody's like, I don't want to see what's going on.
Well,
It's
yeah, I mean, it is scary, but I think it's now come even further, and the word that we use is permeable, because it's more than just, we have to be so open and transparent. It's like, you better realize that your brand is permeable, and so how do you manifest and walk through the world as a permeable brand?
so this is also part of this too, I think, is about how do you lead with a different foot forward? So driven by profit, it leads to the we've been using some examples, so we'll just keep rolling with those. We'll just pick on Facebook today. So if you think about it, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of these companies like the Amazons and the Facebooks, et cetera, to monetize. And by the way, every client that we've ever worked with that's publicly held is driven by the quarterly earnings report, and driven by that, those results, and driven by profit. However, all of that can be become secondary to purpose. And what is your intent? And what are you trying to do? And are you keeping all of these factors in play? And so this is something that we really work with clients around. And it's not necessarily like, oh, we should have our purpose, and we need to feel good, and we need a program. And it's just really interesting because it's at a different level now. And as I mentioned before, there's this unprecedented level of power that companies have. But also, as employees and as consultants and as agencies and as partners, we want to be working on things that make us feel good, right? So if we think about the fact that people today literally want to consume their values, and now we live in a world where there's a proliferation of content, we are literally consuming content every day, every minute from companies. And so as we consume that, it needs to feel like it's something that in some way is a nourishing consumption that feels like it aligns with our values, it aligns with the world, and is less victim to disruption because it has intent and it has this idea of what is that need that we're meeting in the world today. So that's something that we really think a lot about. And I'll just give you an example. We do a lot of work with Verizon, and if you would go to their headquarters in New Jersey, you actually can walk. I think aside from the Pentagon, you can in DC. It's the longest walk you can take and not leave a building. It's like this huge, like you could walk for miles inside Verizon's headquarters. And so it has this feeling in there that's very corporate. And you guys have all been in these spaces, right? You walk in and you're like, I feel weird being human in here, right? It has this awkward, like you have to be a business. I don't know. It just has this strange vibe.
Bad lighting too.
Bad lighting.
Cubes, a lot of cubes.
A lot of cubes. It's just the conference rooms are labeled with numbers. It's like, I don't know. You can't even figure out how to navigate this huge building. The thing that's really interesting, though, is if you think about what Verizon, and we've been working a lot with their corporate social responsibility group, which, by the way, shouldn't be a group, it should be their company. And it's if you think about it, they're thinking like, well, we're selling services, and no, it's very rational, and people don't care about it. You need connectivity. They're creating connections, literally connecting you to the expanse that is the internet. They're connecting you to anybody that you're text messaging with. They're connecting you to the world. So if every employee at Verizon walked into the job every day saying, my job is to light up the world, to make those connections happen, to make this future happen, how exciting would that be, right? So, I mean, that's something that we're working with them on, but that's a purpose. That's not saying like, well, do we put money in STEM education, or girls in tech, or that's so sort of compartmentalized. It's really about lighting up and really focusing on what is this world order and what is the need of the time, how are we enabling that, and how can we really recruit everybody into that mission. So shall we jump into, so another one too is we talked about this in this new world. It's funny, we used to think about competency as the most polished presentation, and actually one of the brands that we worked on in the past was Apple, and Apple is a supreme example of this. What a gorgeous brand! All the creative is beautiful, the best directors, the best photographers, and by the way, they still work with the best talent out there. But literally, even Apple has shot by Dagny on iPhone, right? Like that's part of they're actually using user-generated content in their pristine, beautiful ads. So we live in this world where actually it's flipped. It used to be that you credentialed somebody and gave them your trust and gave them you had this sense of credibility if they felt like they gave you a polished presentation. And now we are totally feeling like, what are even our eye, and I think we're in this moment right now with Instagram and social media. It's like it's too perfect, right? And so it feels like I don't live like that. I don't know. My coffee doesn't always look like that in the morning. It looks like and so. The more authentic, the better. Literally, our eye and our ear has changed, and we see this even with our political candidates, right?
I was going to say it's true with humans as well now.
With humans, what do you really believe? Yeah. I want to know what you really think. Don't give me the party line. Yeah. If you give me the party line, I can sniff it out. So, so that's what we see with our clients too. It's like are the executives on social media? Are the leadership teams on social media? What are you saying? What do you believe? Does it feel like you're saying something that's canned? that's totally over. So really showing up as authentic, really understanding that. And by the way, to show up authentic, you actually have to be doing it. So for Verizon to show up talking about lighting up the world with connections, they actually have to have people who at the company who feel like that's what they're doing, right? So really showing up in that way. And I think that's definitely the world that we live in. So let's keep going.
So yeah, and this is related to that. The story part, I think, is a big part of the authenticity. I mean, if there are any number of examples here where it just used to be when you had a certain market share, et cetera, it was game over. Our clients nowadays, it's so interesting that even the biggest, a General Mills is saying, oh my gosh, we're so jealous of those little guys because they have a story, right? They have an authentic story, and that, it's amazing because yes, it's all, we all have thousands of connections. We have all the data at our fingertips, and there are and our clients are still in love and enamored with their data. But what still breaks through is story, right? We still have the human foundation of what resonates in our brain, and ultimately we are wired to react to stories. We'd like to think that we're so rational, and so when it's, and we still have these where, but we just have to get the facts across and this and that, but we are creatures of irrationality. If I don't know if people here have read, Kahneman did Thinking Fast and Slow, and he actually won the Nobel for that, and he's the one who said, we actually have system 1 and system 2 in our brain, and system 1 is like the snap judgment that acts really, really fast, and system 2 is more rational, so we think that we're being very, very rational and thinking things through, but in fact we're sort of backfilling that irrational snap judgment. So it's all of which is to say, yes, we live in a digital world, yes, we live in a world of infinite information, but story is still the way that human beings process things, and it's still the way that you're going to actually win hearts and even minds ultimately. So. And then I think this one's funny too, because it was not long ago, it was just a few years ago, that we were often being asked to make the case that nothing's B2B anymore. It's all B2C, because Leslie just mentioned our eye has changed, our expectations of what a brand looks like has changed, and even B2B has to play in a certain way and be communicating in a certain way. And here too, it seems to have changed really fast, and even that construction is not helpful, because if you think of everything that we've been talking about, authenticity and story and all of those things, what it really means is it's human to human, and that's what we mean by H to H. Like, we don't go to work and put on a different hat anymore. More and more, it's the same. We're looking at our social feeds and platforms as human beings, not as the boss of this, and then going home and being a husband or a wife or this and that. It's all one, it's all the same, and so those same things are having to resonate. So sort of new roles is just, you're not thinking of it as human to human, you're
well, I read an interview with you guys when Fearless had just started, and I was terrifying you with bringing that up this morning. And you mentioned this notion, because it's a very permeable organism, right? A brand now, exactly. Right? It's all the behaviors. It's the CEO getting into a little bit too much liquor and writing some bad things, whatever. It's all these things come back to feed themselves. And in this world of old versus new, in this article, you even talked about how we see audiences. Like, very often when you would get a brief, you're like, oh, this is a B2C client, this is a B2B client, or it's this. And all of a sudden, and I've always even thought about that and trying to be the best designer I can. My job is to be objective, but I'm a human, so I have massive subjectivity built in. At some point, you guys said that there was this mention of consumers versus citizens in this article I read. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting that your guys were like, we can't really see them as two separate audiences. They're the same thing, because they might have values, but those values are going to go make them buy things, and they want to see the brand upholding. It was just a really interesting way to go, you're right, it has all changed, and it's so much more inclusive these days. I mean, I think one of the things that, if you can get somebody to find this promise or unlock their truth, because at some point you do have to go establish a bigger value than I'm just getting the best phone. Right. Connection, right? Because that's going to be something they're going to pay attention to. There's so many choices out there. What are some of the in ways that you guys start to unlock those things and get brands to go, this is where it starts?
Yeah.
That's funny. Should we go? Yeah. Because, that's...
Is it my homework?
Good question. I don't know. Should we just leave it here?
No, so right, so great question. So look, we are strategy led, and we always start with strategy. So it's interesting. I think the first answer is, a few years ago it was one thing we would deliver these finely polished brand platforms that, you frame in gold and put up on the wall, and then, that was it. And they spend their money, and it's like, damn, this better last us, like you get a good 10 years out of this one, right? Strategy feels like something you have to actually be thinking about and building every day, but you definitely do have to, again, goes back to that yin yang.
Mm-hmm.
Well, surely some part of the story, the promise has to be enduring, but some part has to change. But one of the things is, that feels so critical, is like, how does an organization actually be thinking of itself in a nimble way that it can be reactive to all those forces that are happening and not lose itself, not lose its soul, not forget who it is, et cetera, right? And so one of the things that we use is this idea of truth as a question. And here's what we mean by that. We often think of our truths, and by the way, this is so true for people too. We think of our truths in terms of our facts, right? Brands do this all the time. We sell X, our customer is Y, we're in the business of Z, that type of thing. People do it too. It's like, I'm a female in a male-dominated industry. I actually have a degree that's obsolete, whatever. These are facts, right? But those facts can be very limiting. I mean, facts are really interesting things. Like, we use facts, and I'm not talking about journalism, which I used to be too. Like, I'm talking about your deep human truths or your brand truth. Facts are very limiting because they are moments in time, if you think about it. And these days, the minute you even publish a fact, it's outdated. And we use facts to end conversations, right? Face facts, it's a fact. The facts speak for themselves. I mean, it's like those are conversation stoppers, and therefore they are evolution stoppers. Facts land in the brain differently than questions. And here's our little neuroscience sidetrack. When you hear a fact or a statistic, it's like your brain just gets all binary, and it's like dropping a ball in a slot, and you feel like which, that I agree or I disagree, right or wrong. When you ask a question, your neurons, or when you're asked a question, your neurons are firing in your brain because you're wrestling with an answer, and you actually have to think about it in a different way. And they've shown that when you are actually asked a question about something, you are more likely to act, right? Whether it's voting or buying a car or anything like that. So there is great power in questions. And so when we are now working on brands, what we're ultimately doing is, yes, we're still building a brand platform that often has a mission, vision, values, promise, but what we're really looking to do is land a question about their intent that they can be continually asking. And yes, you can do this as a person, as a human as well, is when you have really arrived at that deep intent, what does it look like to manifest that today? What does it look like to manifest that today? And that's a way of getting past those closely held stories about ourselves that, the fact might be this, and yesterday the fact was that, but actually the most important thing I can do today is to unremember that. Because what worked yesterday will not necessarily work tomorrow.
Yeah, this is really critical, the unremembering and the question part, because if you think about it, to a certain degree, strategy and sort of brand decision making is something that was a moment in time, and we get so we decided what our brand's about, and we're done with that, right? We just need to execute. What we've discovered is that a lot of our clients know a lot about their truth and who they are and what they're good at and their facts. And we'll give you a couple of examples. Those quarterly reports, we've sold this, we make this, we do this. And then they're like, wait, we're totally on the social media ride, or all that permeability stuff, we're screwed. So they don't, how do we adapt? Yeah. How do we, everything's changing every minute. It's paralyzing us. We feel like our organization, our structure, our team, our expertise is all outdated. It's the minute that we, reorg, we're outdated, right? So what do we do? And so in a way, it really changed how we think about brand. And so this is what we're finding that works, is you have to understand and parse apart. These are the things that we feel comfortable and that we know to be true. These are our facts. Let's put them in the fact category. Let's understand them as facts so that we don't confuse them with that they're going to be the thing that guide us. They just happen to be, as Dagny just said, this moment in time. However, if we think about our truth, how do we turn that truth, that thing we're really trying to do, that purpose, that intent, into a question then every single person in the organization, every customer even, becomes an agent of change because they're actually asking the question, how do I do an acquisition campaign with intent if my intent is to create a better, sell bikes because I want to create a greener world? What does that look like to do that? How do I show up in a way, and we have a couple of examples of how do I show up in a way that the strategic intent of my brand and my business can manifest itself through every little tactical thing we do, every employee, every decision, everything.
We probably sound nuts, so we should give an example.
We should give an example.
You guys are like, we lost you. Okay, so Gap is an old example, but this one's kind of fun to do precisely because, I mean, when's the last time, like, a lot of us haven't been shopping at Gap. It used to be the biggest mainstream brand in America, right? Gap, we worked on, this is something that we were actually at CPB when this was a question that was brought in front of us. But, when they came to us, they were starting to have to close stores and contracting and this and that. And, they came to us and it was like, guys, look, we make khakis, t-shirts, and jeans, and now those are commodities. Those are basics, and they're everywhere, and we've lost our reason for, being. So what do we do? And it was so interesting because when we looked back at their trajectory and at their truth, it's like, well, first of all, you used to be the Gap. What did the Gap stand for? I'm like older than all of you in this room. It stood for the generation gap. The generation gap. It was a point of view. It was rebellious. They brought jeans to America like when nobody was wearing them. They were the first ones to sell Levi's. Is actually what they sold, right? And then over the years, there was a moment where Sharon Stone actually she did it twice. She wore a black turtleneck tee with a ball gown, and then she did it again later. She wore just one of their white button-down shirts to the Oscars. And it was this moment of rebellion. It was like, I don't have to show a lot of skin. I don't have to wear a lot of bling. It was another moment of rebellion. Khakis in the office were originally a moment of rebellion. And so it's like, you guys, you think your truth
Literally
is
the
you
opposite of what you
sell
think about
basics.
Gap, yeah.
You are rebels. And if you were able to ask yourself, like, how does a rebellious brand manifest in today's world? Maybe you'd be selling something other than, maybe it's time to step up and get out of the jeans. Maybe it's time to do athleisure. Leslie pointed out they should have invented, or been the ones to own athleisure.
If they had said,
how does a rebel show up today? How does a rebel? Yeah, exactly. So that's an example of truth
Could be
is
in
a
one
question.
of those one-piece sleeping bags.
Yes, they could have owned it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's an example of truth is a question and asking yourself, and the whole idea of knowing what's foundational and core versus getting confused with the facts of what we did yesterday.
Should I do one more example?
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, that's all right.
Yeah.
You could, So that's an example of what we mean by that. So here.
Well, and so this was really interesting to me because I'm very interested in the process of getting clients to give you the stuff, right? To go and help them do what they're kind of asking you to. But literally, I thought about this is when a client shows up at your door, you can't say what will move you forward, or can you? Do you literally put the question on the table and say, what is your? Because you need the question to know the truth. It's a little chicken
It's an
and egg.
excavation. I mean, no, they usually are asking the wrong question.
Okay.
I mean, they're always asking the wrong
Right.
question, almost always. It's like, no, they are, and it's right. I mean, if any of you've done it, right, they come to you with an assignment, or here's what we, and then begins the excavation. We sometimes call it the Big Bang. We look at everything that they have. We love looking deep in their past. I mean, this is fairly standard, but then also looking outside and what are the big forces that are happening, and then come back to them and say, actually, here is a different take on what we think you are potentially all about, and here's the question you really need to be asking yourselves, right?
And it's, as you guys were running through those examples and things like that, I think one of the questions I get asked a lot here is about being fulfilled in the work that you do. So people say, oh, how do I do more of the work I want to do? And I swear it's the dumbest response, but you do more of the work you want to do. Right?
I think it's also, yeah.
You find a fabulous partner. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good point. You do. No,
oh, you mean her point? I got you.
But no, I think that's a good point because it's actually showing up in the way that you are it's like walking the walk and talking the talk. Like you do the work and know what you're about and what you're good at and what you believe. And then when you show up to your clients and they ask you a question and they're coming to you for expertise, how should we show up? What should what should our positioning be? How do we adapt to this crazy world that we're in? And so we could say, well, what do you think? And what do you believe? And what's working for you? And what's selling? And what do you? Instead, it's about kind of, and I hate to use this word, but being fearless. To say, I'm not afraid to tell you that this approach is going to last a year. It might last you 2, but in 3 or 5 years, you're going to be screwed because the world's going to have moved on. So I think it's really about to do more of the work that you want to do. It's about showing up and kind of sharing the vision and the passion that you have and bringing it to everything that you do. So whether you're an employee, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're starting your own business, whether you're a founder of a business, whether you own a brand, whether you're a brand consultant, all of those things are about speaking the truth and pushing it and understanding that and understanding that how you show up is definitely going to impact how your client shows up. So.
And that is the segue to, and this is the moment where I want to say something about being a woman in this business, because
we haven't brought it up yet, but in case you didn't know.
Because we didn't
Women
know.
run business.
We didn't know when
we had no idea we were female.
Yeah.
Until that article came out, and you're like, hey.
No, it's funny because we're serious in a way, because when we founded Fearless, we gave no thought whatsoever to this idea of we are female founded, and that was the line. I mean, the first stories, yes, were about Alex Bogusky, because he is one of our co-founders and advisors, and so he always gets press. But the second thing was, and these 2 women founded this business, and we're like, holy shit! They're talking we've never looked at ourselves that way, and we never cared. And the reason that matters is this, because what Leslie just said is something that we actually had to get to ourselves. When we were working for those larger agencies, they were largely male. And I think we carried ourselves a certain way through that, because we knew, and you're seeing a lot of this in the Me Too movement right now, we knew exactly how we were supposed to behave in those situations. And we were very good at it. And both of us were athletes as young women and this and that. And we felt like we can be one of the guys. I can do that really well. I can be not sensitive. I can not show my female side. I can be as much one of the guys. I mean, I had a thing when we were very often the only female. We'd be traveling with 10 guys, be the only female. I made damn sure nobody ever waited for me in the airport going to the bathroom. I kid you not. I kid you not. That is how ingrained in us it was. And when, even just a few years ago when we founded Fearless, we really were thinking about it differently. It's we're just badass and we're tough and we can play this game, etc. And something has shifted in the last few years. And that idea of really owning yourself and your truth and doing what you love, I look at these young women today and I just think, I am so excited and happy for where this world is going, because it's not about having to be one of the guys. It's about being most fully yourself and bringing what you love, and not having to pretend or be tougher, or only a certain kind of woman can succeed. There's room for all different kinds. And by the way, a lot of this probably applies to men too, who felt that they had to be a certain way. Anyway, off on my diatribe, but I'm so excited about where this is headed. And I think that we were playing the game too, and our stance on this has really changed over the last few years. It's just really interesting, and it's different than having to be one of anything other than what's your truth and what do you feel confident bringing to the table. So the way that we're walking through the world in this industry has changed.
That's...
Yeah.